Now, for the last 90 minutes or so, we've been talking about what writers denominate as the conspiracy. That is the action of some force that's not visible, that's not apparent, that works in the background of world events to create the situations that occur, such as all the wars, all the depressions, all the famines, all the political intrigues, all the government positions, and all the assassinations, and all the political maneuvering. An invisible force that is at work. As a Bible believer, of course, we recognize the source of this immediately. It's found in Ephesians chapter 5 and other passages of the Bible, and deals with a personal, malevolent power called Satan or Lucifer. You'll find he's been converted into Jesus Christ in Isaiah chapter 14 in the New International Version of Scripture. And Gail Ripplinger wrote one of the finest books you ever read on the relation of these new versions to the new age we're talking about. But what we're talking about here is a global occupation, a one-world government to be set up as a totalitarian dictatorship. And we've already remarked that this one-world totalitarian dictatorship is going to be set up will make Hitler's Third Reich look like a republic. We've already noticed the amazing connection the Roman Catholics have with this form of government. As anyone knows, the Roman Catholic Church is the fascist form of Christianity. It is operated by a dictator. As a matter of fact, he claims to be an infallible dictator when he speaks about matters of faith and practice. As a matter of fact, the oligarchy claims to be infallible when they teach anything. The idea that just the Pope is infallible is nonsense. You've got literature piled up the ceiling, and I've got tapes all over the place from Carl Keating that show that the Roman Catholic Church of the magisterium, that is the combination of bishops and archbishops, are infallible every time they open the cotton-picking mouths. But in discussing this thing, we've learned one thing, first of all, that all educated progressives believe in the absolute necessity of a one-world government. We quoted Harold Urey, Arthur Compton, Robert Oppenheimer, Dr. R.B. Perry, Professor Hawking, Joseph Clark, Raymond Swing, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and H.G. Wells. Wells gives the definitive statement when he says, quote, "It is necessary to discover a head capable of directing the one-world government, endowed with an intelligence surpassing the most elevated human level." Now, that's where our UFOs are going to show up in a minute. But we haven't gotten that far yet. What we've noticed is that when the Roman Catholic Adolf Hitler, with his Roman Catholic propaganda man, Joseph Goebbels, wanted to create an emergency, he created it by having the Reichstag burned down and had the Roman Catholic Hermann Goering handle the prosecuting attorney. And after that was over, after the emergency was declared, then Franz Stangl, Roman Catholic, took over the Auschwitz, or the Treblinka concentration camp. Rudolf Hess, the Roman Catholic, took over the Auschwitz concentration camp, and Koch, K-O-C-H, took over the Buchenwald concentration camp under Heinrich Himmler, the Roman Catholic. We remarked the fact that all writers since World War II have bewailed and bemoaned this terrible thing about this totalitarian genocide blankety blank. And every one of them, in moralizing on his own work, has come to the conclusion that the most dangerous thing on earth is a totalitarian form of government. In spite of this mass of literature and reruns of World War II, which has gone on for nearly 50 years, the world right now is heading for the greatest totalitarian police state the world has ever seen. The only thing that men learn from history is men never learn from history. The men behind this, of course, are Roman Catholics, the primarily one being John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who set up the Office of Emergency Executive Orders, which we discussed, and named the orders and gave the number of the orders, if you remember. And the executive orders passed by John F. Kennedy in 1962 state that at any time, by simply declaring an emergency, federal troops can come into your house and murder you and your wife and your children, see Boise, Idaho, or Waco, Texas, seize all your property without any explanation, send you to Canada and your wife to Mexico and your kids to Delaware to be put in detention camps, without arrest or trial by jury. The alibi is an emergency. We discussed the fact that the CIA was founded from the OSS after World War II, actually founded during World War II, but continued to exercise power after World War II was over on the grounds that the emergency never ended. Then we spent a great deal of time talking about how emergencies are created to justify these beings, and discussing the CIA, founded by the Roman Catholic Wild Bill Donovan, and set up in Catholic Canada from the OSS, and headed up by William Colby, the Roman Catholic head of the CIA. We talked about how these fellows have unlimited funds, well, actually $2 billion a year given to them, for which they don't have to give any account for or tell what they did with it. And we spent considerable time talking about their operations and how they operate and how they function, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and their connection with the CFR, the Council of Foreign Relations. We know that the Council of Foreign Relations came from Cecil Rhodes in England, who set up a round table called Camelot by the press when Kennedy was in, which was a secret society for the rule of the entire world under one rule, under England. And Cecil Rhodes was a man who owned gold and diamond mines in South Africa. Rhodesia is named after him, now Zambia and Zimbabwe. And the first concentration camps put up on this earth were set up in South Africa. Like the Russians are now setting them up under Mandela. And they were set up for the Boers, B-O-E-R-S, the Dutch settlers, by Lord Kitchener in 1900, and 26,000 white Dutchmen died in those camps. That's the CFR, related to the CIA, and we gave the names of the people connected with the CFR. The reason why Slick Willie got him a, quote, Rhodes Scholarship was because of Cecil Rhodes, born 1835, died 1902, who wanted to put up a one-world government controlled by England, with an inner circle called the Circle of the Initiates, an outer circle called the Association of Helpers, and the local chapter in America of the CFR, chaired by Rockefeller, the head of the Chase National Bank, was set up in July 29, 1921. Now that brings us up to date. But notice very carefully the elements. Careful, please. The Federal Reserve System, 1913, an independent bank set up to bankrupt countries and bring depression and create inflation by printing counterfeit money. The League of Nations, 1920, which did nothing when the Roman Catholic Francisco Franco overthrew the Spanish government with the help of the Roman Catholic Adolf Hitler and the Roman Catholic Benito Mussolini. And now we're ready for some of the rest of these fellows on the Council of Foreign Relations. And the next thing we run into that comes up in the history of this conspiracy is the UN, the United Nations in New York, with a building donated by John D. Rockefeller, Jr. And the Secretary General of the UN praised Lenin. And later on they got Kurt Waldheim, a good Austrian Roman Catholic, in. There is no way you can segregate a one world, united, one global occupation theory without the Roman Catholic Church. For it is an absolute dictatorship controlled by an oligarchy. And always has been, always will be. The failure of the press to report this is fantastic. The United Nations was set up in 1945 in New York and connected to with San Francisco, the home of the queers. Perhaps the most asinine statement ever made by an educated jackass in this century was made by Harry S. Truman, a Baptist from Missouri, who said in 1950 that the UN was going to usher in the greatest era of peace the world has ever seen. If Truman had rocks for brains, you wouldn't have known the difference. The UN was founded, quote, to maintain world peace. And the next 40 years that followed, they got more people killed that were killed between 4000 BC and 1500 AD. When the UN was set up, war broke out in Indonesia in 1947, in China, 1947, in Kashmir, Greece, and Israel in 1949, in the Philippines in 1952, in Indochina in 1954, and Malaya in 54, which was followed by wars in Korea in 1950, and again in 53, and Formosa in 50, and Kenya, Sinai, Suez, Hungary, Lebanon, Tibet, Cyprus, Algeria, Cuba, Laos, Kuwait, in 1956, 1958, 1959, 1962, 1959, and then in Yemen in 62, in the Congo in 62, in the Chad and Cuba in 1962, and then in Cyprus, Rhodesia, Colombia, Venezuela, Malaysia, the Congo, Thailand, Peru, Pakistan, Beirut, San Salvador, Nicaragua, Iraq, Iran, and Lebanon in 1963, 64, 65, 72, 75, 82, 83, 86, 84. I keep a list of them. Lebanon in 1976, Afghanistan in 1980, Poland in 1981, Beirut in 1982, Grenada in 1983, Iraq and Iran in 1986, Lebanon in 1985, Afghanistan in 1985, Kuwait in 1991, and the Kurds in 1991, and Croatia in 1992, and Liberia in 1992, and Bosnia in 1994, in Cambodia in 1993, in Uganda in 1978, and Rwanda in 1994. 54 wars in 45 years. That's the United Nations in downtown New York, built by the CFR, John D. Rockefeller, with the Secretary General CFR and Kurt Waldheim, CFR. That's the bunch. Another bunch is called the Institute for Pacific Relations, founded in New York, 1922. Note that the Council for Foreign Relations, CFR, the Institute for Pacific Relations, and the United Nations, and the Trilateral Commission all come out of New York. What is New York? New York contains more black people than the largest city in Africa. Check it in the Guinness Book of Records. There are more than 30,000 blacks in New York than there are in Johannesburg, South Africa. And New York is called Death City by the police force and Stink City by the sanitary department and called Stupid City by the teachers who teach there. That's the source of your foreign policies as set up by the United Nations, the State Department, and the administration. That's them. In 1968, another interesting conspiratorial group was set up called the Club of Rome. And in 1954, the Bilderbergers out of Holland. And then finally the Trilateral Commission, New York, 1973. We'll speak of these before we get to our UFOs. Because the UFOs now get a direct connection to furnish the, quote, head, quote, quoting H.G. Wells, with an intelligence, to quote H.G. Wells, that surpasses the human level. Atta baby. Now, the Bilderbergers came out of Holland in 1954. They were founded by a man called Prince Bernhard of the House of Orange, who belonged to the SS, the Roman Catholic Nazi SS, before the war, and he worked for I.G. Farben Company. That is according to all sources. That particular one is paid $390 in a work by Bramley, B-R-A-M-L-E-Y, called The Gods of Eden. Now, Prince Bernhard was chairman of the Oil Shell Company and founded the Bilderbergers. Connected with I.G. Farben. What is I.G. Farben? Well, the I.G. Farben directors were Max and Paul Warburg. They were both instrumental in setting up the Federal Reserve System, which we've talked about. The director was A.H.A. Metz, charge of the Bank of Manhattan at times, and the Bank of Manhattan was a Warburg bank that merged into the Chase Manhattan Bank under Rockefeller. One director of the American I.G. Farben, F-A-R-B-E-N, was C. Mitchell, a Federal Reserve Bank director and a National City Bank director. Hermann Schmitz, president of the I.G. Farben in Germany, served on the board of, quote, the Bank for International Settlements, International, CFR, Council of Foreign Relations. Now this I.G. Farben is quite an outfit. They were given, via Hitler, from England, the Bank of England, $6 million, 6 million pounds, which is more than $6 million, of Czechoslovakian gold reserves after Hitler had invaded Czechoslovakia. Bramley paid $386. And throughout the war, the Ford plants in Germany supported the war effort, and the German subsidiaries of General Electric and IT&T gave money to the Roman Catholic SS under Heinrich Himmler, paid $387. You know what the Nazi leaders believed, working there, the I.G. Farben, you know, and during the war? You know what they believed, the SS leaders? They believed, quote, are you listening? That underground aliens would return to the surface of the earth if racial purification was carried out. They believe in a hollow earth with aliens underground. Now you should guess by now the direction we're headed. But the CIA, remember the good old CIA? Roman Catholic Wild Bill Donovan under the Dulles, whose boy was a priest, who went to Catholic Canada and set it up from the OSS. The CIA accepted Reinhard Gehlen, G-E-H-L-E-N, of the Nazi SS after the war was over, paid $390, and incorporated the Secret Service intelligence functions of the SS into the Central Intelligence Agency headed up by the Roman Catholic William Colby. Now how about that? The Interpol, I-N-T-E-R-P-O-L, is the International United Nations sort of a drug enforcement agency. It's headed up by former Nazi SS officers. Every one of them was a Roman Catholic. And it was headed up by them until 1972. You know, in the last half of the 1970s, you know what the CIA did? It conducted germ warfare experiments on American citizens. Page 418, Bramley. A germ fog was sprayed on San Francisco by a Navy ship and reported in the Los Angeles Times September 17, 1979. 800,000 San Francisco citizens were exposed. It was an aerosol substitute of bacteria called Serratia, S-E-R-R-A-T-I-A. Later on, it was found out to be the cause of a type of pneumonia that could be fatal. It was sprayed in the San Francisco area for 6 days by the CIA without Congress or anybody voting anything. 12 people were hospitalized and 1 died. The CIA then revealed, after the operation was over, and they never reveal anything to Congress until it's through, that tests like these have been tried out 239 times on the American people between 1949 and 1969, and 80 of the 239 times have been tried out with actual germs on Panama City, Florida, Key West, Florida, New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. These tests reportedly ended in 1969, whereupon AIDS or GRID showed up. Now, isn't that something? The Bilderbergers turns out to be a group of people that you can't join unless you're in the CFR. And the Bilderbergers meet at regular intervals in different places. We'll talk a little bit more later about when they meet and why they meet. But all their activities since 1960 have been connected with UFOs. We now come to the Club of Rome, established in Rome in 1968. It has 25 American CFR members. Founded April of 1968, and in September of 1973, it, quote, regionalized an adaptive model of the global world system. What does that mean? You set up district court judges. The United States is no longer a group of independent states. It's divided into districts, which include more than one state, which, by the way, is unconstitutional. The Constitution is at no time will the states to be gathered into a unit, so they form a unit instead of separate states. But Lincoln took care of that, as we said in our last tape. And the Club of Rome is a Roman Catholic organization which accepts Roman Catholic CFR members and has always set up a global world system with 10 districts. The police state is to be complete, and each district is to be told how many children a family can have, what their income can be, what kind of work they can do, at what age they have to die to relieve the population explosion, where they can go, and eventually they'll be implanted with ID implants so each individual can be traced on a computer. The number one area of this model is Canada and the USA. The number two area is England. The third area is Japan. The fourth area is Australia. It's all laid out. By the way, England is set out with Western Europe as a group. We have, sitting in at number 5, South Africa, or rather Russia. Russia is number 5. Then we have Latin America sitting at number 6. Then we have North Africa sitting as number 7. Then we have South Africa sitting in as number 8. India and Malay as number 9. And China as number 10. This is set up for a totalitarian global world dictatorship set up at Rome. The Club of Rome, April 1968. The 10 districts set up in September of 1973. And CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, and National Public Radio never opened their mouth one cotton-picking time. Now you understand these are government agencies involved in a conspiracy. These are things like the Illuminati, founded back there at Ingolstadt, May 1st, 1776 by Adam Weishaupt, the Roman Catholic. This isn't talking about Freemasonry behind the French and American Revolution. This is not talking about Satanism. We're talking here about government political agency that is supported by tax money, designed to enslave the entire world through computers and electronic devices. And the agencies involved so far are the Federal Reserve Bank, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the Council of Foreign Relations. Later we'll get into the Environmental Protection Agency, the National Security Agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the Drug Enforcement Agencies, the ACLU, and the Internal Revenue Service. But right now we're dealing with the UN, the Club of Rome, the Bilderbergers, the Council of Foreign Relations, the League of Nations, the CIA, and the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission, as the Council for Foreign Relations, was set up in New York in 1973. It was set up to make the USA dependent on other economies, headed up by David Rockefeller. The first director and drafter of the charter was Brzezinski, Brzezinski, a devotee of the French Jesuit priest Teilhard de Chardin, Chardin, who taught Marxism. It has 325 members. To expose this, a congressman named Larry McDonald and a congressman named Jesse Helms tried to expose it, and McDonald was killed accidentally in an airliner in 1983 in Korea, by which there's been no end of talk, and Jesse Helms has been attacked by the press on a national scale ever since he got in office. And the last time he got in office, a senator for North Carolina, every paper in California, New York, Chicago, Pennsylvania, Florida, Illinois, and Colorado went to work on him, including every queer on both coasts. This is the Trilateral Commission. Now we have our agencies pretty well laid out. The CFR, Council of Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, the Club of Rome, the Bilderbergers, the United Nations, the League of Nations, the Institute for Pacific Relations. And these are the units that are set up to run the world independently of Congress, and the last one is set up to make America economically dependent upon Europe. That is the European Community, Roman Catholic, headed up by the Pope, with a Roman Catholic Mary sitting on a Spanish Roman Catholic bull. You ever seen the insignia? It's to control the economy of America. To make sure that it does, European troops and Asiatic troops are now being trained in America and carried around in black helicopters. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So that when the emergency is declared, review tape number 1, they can enter and break and commit armed robbery and murder legally. This explains all the gun control stuff you've been hearing about for the last 10 years. The reason why they don't want you to have military or semi-automatic weapons is because the troops that are going to take your property will have military weapons, semi-automatic weapons. At that time, they intend to get you killed. That's Sarah Brady and Hillary, and Donna Shalala and Joycelyn and the whole bunch of radical left-wing psychopaths. They're connected with the Trilateral Commission, the CFR, the Club of Rome, and the Bilderbergers. Buddy, you talk about a conspiracy. Because these outfits or agencies control the Justice Department, which means that the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and the Drug Enforcement Agency will be used to bring in the goals of these groups. And in full cooperation will be the HRS, the International Revenue Service, the NACP, the NEA, the National Education Association, and the ACLU, the American Civil Ho-Ho Liberty Union. Now, I had to give this background to prepare you for what is to follow. Because what is to follow deals with contacts with UFOs through the CIA. And the material is all censored. It's maximum security. And as Colby said, you don't have to lie as long as you don't talk. That's good Roman Catholic Jesuit stuff, mental reservation. But he said the only time you have to talk is when there's a leak in information. And there has been a leak. And the leak is bad, because it comes out in 3 matrices published by a fellow called Valdemar Valerian, which may be a pseudonym, but is published more than 1,000 pages. And they come from people who have been in the inner workings of this great one-world global occupation that is looking for, quote, a head. That's H.G. Wells. They're looking for a head whose intelligence, quote, must surpass the most elevated human level. With this in mind, let's see what has been done in regards to contacting UFO aliens from outer space and using them as the foundation or background for setting up a one-world computerized electronic police state, a totalitarian worldwide government. Now, frankly, I've always thought and have always taught, without any variation in 40 years, that people who don't believe in UFOs are mentally sick. I've always believed that. I think if you don't believe in UFOs, there's something wrong with your head. In a court of law, if 2 or 3 witnesses bear testimony, eyewitness to an event, it's accepted as authentic. And the number of people who've seen UFOs now are so legion that you couldn't even write down a third of the names. Not even a tenth. UFOs have now been seen by millions of people. More than twice. Or 4 or 5 times. The existence is beyond question. And I'll show you why in a minute. Now, the background of this alien conspiracy, which in the Bible, of course, is connected with principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. And I might add, intelligences far superior to human intelligence, to quote H.G. Wells, are not earthly rulers. Notice the statement in Isaiah 24:21. It shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish, watch it carefully, the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. The host of the high ones that are on high are above the kings of the earth. Did you notice that? So when Paul talked about principalities and powers and wickedness in high places, he was making no reference to kings and dictators. Ephesians 6:12, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, then they're not kings and dictators. But against principalities, they're not flesh and blood. Against powers, they're not flesh and blood. Against the rulers of the darkness of this world, they're not flesh and blood. Against spiritual wickedness in high places, and they're not flesh and blood. Did you get that? There are 45 Bible teachers in America who haven't got that thing right yet. He's not talking about human beings. Now for a brief background of the alien conspiracy as it's connected with the Council of Foreign Relations, whose members I listed, and the Trilateral Commission, and the Rhodes Scholarship, and Slick Willie, and the FBI, and Janet Reno. What we need to do is bring our material up to date. In the Book of the Dead, collected from 1591 B.C., about 300 years after Elihu wrote the book of Job, the Egyptian god Tot T-H-O-T, you'd pronounce thought or thot, says to Osiris, another Egyptian deity, quote, I am the great God in the divine boat, B-O-A-T. Now, did you get that? You say, Ruckman, you keep saying that. What is so significant about that? Didn't you read about that big boat in Ezekiel chapter 27? In verse 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35 on Tyrus that went right into, quote, Thou hast been kneaded in the garden of God, thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day thou wast created till iniquity was found in thee, Ezekiel 28. The divine boat. Now, don't you find that interesting? In view of the fact that every one of your rocket ship flyers is called an astronaut. Do you know what naut means, N-A-U-T? It's an abbreviation for nautical. It's a mariner. It's marine life. So your astronaut flies a rocket ship. You get that one? Nobody got it at the Naval Air Station got it. Nobody at the Houston Space Center got it. Nobody at Cape Kennedy got it. The man who drives the space ship is an astronaut who goes up through the air waves. W-A-V-E-S. As a pilot. They come by kind of quick, don't they? That is fast enough so that no college professor in America ever picked it up. I just got a clipping a month ago where they found water in outer space. Gee, ain't that something? I knew that in 1949 and taught it from an archaic Elizabethan book that's 300 years out of date. I am the great God, the divine boat. Quote, I am the grand master of the craftsman. Now, these seemingly insignificant statements have tremendous significance if you have access to a Bible. Because when Babylon the Great goes down and is burned, the devil's bride, that city, you read in verse 22 of chapter 18, the voice of harpers and musicians, of pipers and trumpeters shall be heard in her no more, and no craftsman of whatever craft he be shall be found any more in thee. And down goes that city, and it's likened to Tyrus that you just read about in Ezekiel chapter 27, chapter 28. But nobody in the faculty of Bob Jones or Tennessee Temple or BBC knows anything about these matters, because they're using a book they don't believe in order to get an income. And we're talking about studying the Bible. Did you notice what he said about these craftsmen in prophesying on the Antichrist in the book of Daniel? Well, Wiersbe didn't catch it, and J. Vernon McGee didn't catch it, and Perry Rockwood missed it, and Weber missed it, and Bynum missed it, and Kierbun missed it, and the fellow wrote the Lindsay, he missed it. They all missed it. But here it is. Look at it. Daniel 21, a vile person coming in peaceably, obtaining the kingdoms by flattery, signing in a covenant, verse 23, entering peaceably upon the fattest place of the provinces, verse 24, and then in verse 25, talking about stirring up war. The same man in chapter 8, 24, shall destroy wonderfully, prosper in practice, and shall destroy the mighty and holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper, and magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. It's been identified. I am Grand Master of the craftsman. Book of the Dead, 1591 BC. Gets off to an early start, don't it? You recognize that Grand Master? Great Rabbi? That's the favorite expression of the Freemasons. And the most visible garb of Grand Masonry was the apron. If you look at the hieroglyphs of the extraterrestrial gods in Egypt, they all wear an apron in the shape of a triangle. That has been changed, by the way, from a white linen apron to a lambskin in the Freemasonry jargon. One can look at the hymn to Vata, V-A-T-A, the god of the wind, the ancient Hindu literature, and find that he has a chariot in which he travels. It's a boat, according to the Book of the Dead. Many people testify to boats that have neither sails nor smokestacks, and they sail the Pacific Ocean and rise out of it and sail through the air and land in the vicinity of Shasta, Mount Shasta. In the Rosicrucian Digest, May 1931, you'll find these boats coming out of the Pacific and going over the mountains to Mount Shasta in Northern California. They're reported by Guy Warren Ballard in 1930. And Ballard said that he went to underground tunnels. Oh, you better get a hold of this. Underground tunnels in the Grand Teton Range in Wyoming. He went 2,000 feet down by elevators and saw an all-seeing eye painted on the wall and a 12-foot diameter gold disc. He said underground, at these underground locations, he found electronic gadgetry and stores of gold. That's from The Gods of Eden by Bramley, page 364 to 367, published by Avon Books, 1989. He said he was told there about the mating of aliens with women, and that when an alien mated with a human woman, it produced royal blood or blue blood, page 211. So these alien mutations were blue-skinned. When the white Spanish conquistadores wound up in the New World, they were called Viracochas, 1532, by the Maya Indians. Viracochas means white masters. But the problem here is the blue bloods. Now, for 20 years, I have taught that Adam's original circulatory system was a water system. There is not one Christian scholar in the world that agrees with me. I could care less. I teach that since the first public miracle in the Old Testament is the turning of water into blood, Exodus, and the first public miracle Christ performed is turning water into wine, a type of blood, John, that when Adam took the forbidden fruit, it turned his blue blood red. There's one scholar in the world that agrees with that. I couldn't really care any less. I claim the word blue blood indicates royal ancestry, but not from aliens from outer space, from the King of Kings. Now here's the problem. When the Black Death shows up, blue smoke is connected with it. And in the work by Nohl, N-A-O-H-L, The Black Death, published by George Allen Limited, London, 1926, pages 66-67, we find blue smoke coming out of the throats of the dying people hit by the plague. And in 1682, blue smoke is going up from the gables of houses in Eisleben, Germany. When the cholera broke out in 1832 and 1848 in England, it was accompanied by a blue mist. Don't you find that interesting? Now here I'm the problem. A Bolivian legend around 1000 BC says that there was a destruction of Bolivia by a non-human race about 4000 BC, quote, whose blood is not like our blood. The highest lake on earth, Tiahuanaco, Tiahuanaco, was supposed to be settled by aliens with, quote, webbed feet. You better remember that one. For a little later, we'll study about the CIA dealing with people who have webbed hands and a large forefinger index finger. 2 fingers up in the papal blessing. In the History of the Incas by Bertrand Garcia, we have evidence of some kind of a space landing on Lake Titicaca. They claim there they saw a woman with a conical head, C-O-N-I-C-A-L, large ears, and a webbed 4-fingered hand. Do you know who has 4 fingers? Animals. Didn't you ever look at Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck? Haven't you ever looked at Calvin and Hobbes? Or Daffy Duck? Or Pinocchio? How did you miss this? They have 4 fingers. They don't have 5. According to Plato, the Atlanteans who lived in Atlantis were a bluish color. And the good old Bhagavad Gita, the Song of God, says they had a, quote, bluish skin. According to the ancient writings of legends from Peru and Guatemala, they were blue men with round, flat, or pointed heads. In Venezuela, monuments were made to men who came from somewhere with pointed heads. You see, there's a great deal more behind this than CBS, NBC, ABC, and the Christian Network, and all that gas. The Smithsonian Institute and the Bureau of Standards have steel being made in 5000 BC with 8,000 degree furnaces. How about that? That's before the Iron Age ever showed up. And here these fellows worrying about the Jews using copper instead of brass. The coppers in Japan in the 11th century were supposed to be a bunch of people who were web-footed and had 3 hooked fingers and elongated conical heads. They had large triangular eyes and ears. That's Professor Kamataju Kitamura, Kitamura. And in southeast China they found the bones of men over 10 feet tall. That's the paleontologist Pai Wen Chung, and he said these men lived here 300,000 BC. Now, of course, we know the evolutionary notes are nonsense. But discounting bones 10 feet tall is something else. Or the 17-foot tall human skeleton found in Gargay in the Philippines. Isn't that something? The records in Mesopotamia speak about an alien named Ea, who created man as a genetic hybrid. Ea means Prince of the Earth, and his faction was called, quote, the Brotherhood of the Snake. You better remember that one when we run into the CIA's reptilians. Don't you worry, in college you don't get the answers. In college, you don't even get the questions. Now, there's a massive amount of evidence from medieval history and ancient history as to the fact that somebody has been here before. And they weren't human beings in the sense that we know them. Everywhere it is agreed they had superior knowledge, which would make them qualify for what H.G. Wells predicted should take place in the next 3 or 4 years. Remember, the Nazis, the SSS, taught that there was an underground population of aliens who would come up as soon as racial purification took place. So genocide has to be the overture for a one-world government. You have to get rid of somebody. The two objects picked by the press are the Jew and the Christian. The press never suggests you should get rid of atheists or communists or agnostics or Hindus or Muslims or Buddhists. It never suggests, even indirectly, to get rid of Africans or absolutionists or relativists or males or females. The target is what they call, quote, the Judeo-Christian tradition. The two groups that go by a book, and I don't mean Catholic. The Catholic corrects the book every time he doesn't like it by appealing to tradition. Now we're going to get into this matter of documentation, but before we get into it, let us notice this evidence for UFO, and now we're talking about UFO occupants, includes genocide by poison gas and ray guns as far back as 1300 AD. One of the most interesting that ever happened to the world was the coming of the Black Death, which wiped out literally millions of people in Europe after the year 1300. However, the Black Death, beginning to ravage Europe in the 14th century, had a introduction in 1117 AD in January. Quote, and I'm quoting here from Noel's work, The Black Death, and a little later by the work on the Black Death by George Doe, D-E-A-D-E-A-U-X, New York, Weybright and Talley Company, 1969. A fiery comet from the north headed toward the Orient, and the moon, quote, was blood red in the eclipse. A year later, a light as bright as the sun was seen in broad daylight. Page 56 and 57. Now you see that light brighter than the sun? You know who that's connected with, above all people? Joe Smith. In 1820, on a clear day, when Joe Smith was 15 years old, he was, quote, seized by some power. Quote, a thick darkness gathered around me, and a pillar of light over my head above the brightness of the sun fell upon me. I saw two persons. One said, this is my beloved son. Section 2, page 30-31. My room became lighter than noonday. Gabriel was standing in the air, for his feet did not touch the floor. And no wonder, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. 2 Corinthians 11, it is no great thing therefore that his ministers shall be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. Notice how much light the King James Bible sheds on the Black Death and Joe Smith, without anybody catching it. The angel Gabriel that talked to Joe Smith was somewhat of a knucklehead, because he said Daniel's 70th week of the Great Tribulation would take place in Joe's generation. Joe Smith died before 1880. Oh, Gabriel missed it by 100 years. For an angel of God, he wasn't too bright. Now, speaking further of the Black Death and its connection with some type of alien situation, we read in 1606, a general plague followed the appearance of a comet. In 1582, in Prague in the Netherlands and Thuringia, 77,000 people died, and a plague broke out in Brandenburg in 1559 after the appearance of 12 or 15 things that looked like human beings wearing black clothes and carrying scythes. They all appeared in the middle of an oat field and looked like they were mowing oats, but none of the oats were cut. And following that, there were 53,000 casualties. From which time, death has been pictured as a man with a scythe. In 1571, in the mountain towns of Hungary, there appeared black riders who were thought to be Turks, page 63. They weren't Turks, they appeared and disappeared, and a plague followed. The Black Death was attributed to, quote, pestilential air and poisonous fogs in China, India, Persia, Cyprus, and Florence, Italy. That's Doux's work, D-A-U-X, The Black Death, New York, 1996, page 2-4, 96-9. And as we've mentioned, Noel says that blue smoke came out from the throats of the dying who died in the plague. The cholera outbreaks in 1832 and 1848 in England were accompanied by a blue mist. Sounds accompanied the UFO sightings in 1565 in Italy, and thunder was heard day and night. When UFOs were reported in Germany, Noel, page 65, they heard sound like hearses running up and down through the streets, drawn by horses. There were none there. The Great Plague in London was ushered in 1664 with a new blazing star which rose in the east, sank in the southwest at 3 a.m., and disappeared in 2 weeks. It then showed up in Vienna. At Erfurt, we read, quote, this new star had the appearance of a great coffin, C-O-F-F-I-N. That's an ark. That am a boat. Now go back and review the statement on Thot, T-H-O-T, talking to Osiris. At the time this great coffin appeared, everybody heard noises in Erfurt as the sound of firearms and cannon being fired. That's in the work by W.G. Bell called The Great Plague in London, 1655, published by Dodd and Mead Company in 1924, page 1. The documentation is extensive. But what we run into in these accounts of plagues bears a terrible resemblance to somebody showing up in spaceships and spraying poisonous gas. Keep that in mind with the CIA experiments in San Francisco on the other tape. Now here we go. This is the material nobody's going to talk about or discuss or report on because it's history. And these UFOs have been documented so many times in history that you run out of paper in talking about it. I'll give you a dozen. This is the writer Cicero, writing from way back in the back end of nowhere. And Cicero, the historian, says in De Divinitate, Divinitate, quote, 2 suns were seen, and when the sun of the night was seen, I beg your pardon? When the sun of the night was seen, didn't he mean moon? No. When the sun of the night was seen, when noises were heard in the sky, and the sky seemed to split, and strange spheres appeared in it. That's way back around the time of Christ. Pliny the Elder. I mean, it's all through here in Naturalist Historia, the history of nature. Quote, the nocturnal sun, I beg your pardon, the nocturnal sun, that is a light emanating from the sky at night during the consultant of S. Cecilio and G. Papiro, the night was lit up as if it were day. There was a rain of milk and blood in the days of Consulates M. Acili and G. Porcio, and a shower of flesh and iron on Lucania. From Natural History, Section 33. How about that? A fellow says, well, that's obviously just talk. That's obviously just myth. About that shower of flesh and iron and blood coming down? It is. Okay, try this one for size. Ed Mootz, M-O-O-T-Z, of Cincinnati, at 5:30 in the morning, July 22nd, 1955, was out in his garden and noticed that reddish drops were falling on his hand. They were warm and sticky. Then it began to patter all around him. It was darker than blood. Page 61, Frank Edwards, Strange Worlds, Banned Books, 1964. Quote, a red, pinkish, and green cloud was rolling over him. He noticed the red liquid was burning his hands. He washed it off. 6 of his peach trees died overnight. The trunk shriveled and hard, and the grass died around the trees. And U.S. Air Force investigators were called in and they couldn't explain anything. In Napa, California, near Clear Lake, 1857, rocks and trees and houses were coated with something that tasted like ordinary rock candy. Children and pets ate it, page 130. A green rain fell in Dayton, Ohio, March 26, 1948. In Butte County, California, they were pelted with catfish coming down out of the sky and freshwater perch. September 11th, 1878. Flesh and blood. Rain on Los Niatos, California, and Bath County, Kentucky, page 131. And in Kentucky, it was reported by Dr. Troost, T-R-O-O-S-T, professor of chemistry at the University of Nashville. Samples of it were received from Dr. W.P. Saley, A-S-A-Y-L-E, a reputable physician of Lebanon, Tennessee, July 1841, who said the flesh and blood came from a red cloud 5 miles east of Lebanon. Flesh and blood fell over an area half a mile in length and 75 yards wide, and the total was several hundred pounds. How superstitious can one get about UFOs? Why, the documented evidence would knock a judge off a bench. In Richmond, Virginia, they reported flesh and blood dumped over a farm of a man named G.W. Bassett near Cloverleaf, Virginia, on Good Friday of 1850. It was a small reddish cloud, and drops of blood and flesh came down cut into strips. They were identified later as muscle, flesh, liver, and the bottom of a heart, but nobody could identify what kind of heart it was, page 132. The San Francisco Herald, July the 24th, 1851, reported flesh and blood falling on an army station during a drill. It was gathered up by the staff surgeon and analyzed. It was in strips 1/8 inch thick, but no cloud came over at that time, no birds, no planes, or rain. A spring thunderstorm in Worcester, England, May 28, 1881, was a downpour of periwinkles, crabs, snails, and an unknown crab. It rained seafood a half an hour. In Cromer Gardens Road Center, nobody could walk without slipping and sliding on the marine life. On June 1957, Piacenza, Italy, it rained 4-inch eels, page 143. A metallic foil showered down the Pennsylvania Valley near Philadelphia in the fall of 1957, some the size of a man's hand, and the golfers were stopped by gobs of metallic metal on their greens. Rainfalls of frogs and toads have occurred September 7, 1954 in Lancaster, Massachusetts, October 1912 at Beaver County, Oklahoma, and Yoro, Honduras, and Mrs. Victor Meetens, M-I-E-T-E-N-S, of Saginaw, Michigan, in September 1950, had something thump on her head and picked it up. It was cold and clammy. It was an 8-inch live perch, page 144. Hundreds of toads were picked up in Orlando, Florida, September 26, 1954, at 3:15 in the afternoon, where it rained toads, and the same thing happened in Stanton, North Carolina, in the summer of 1961. So Pliny the Elder's on the money when he says showers of flesh and a rain of milk and blood, and named the consulants who were reigning at that time. Let me read, quote, 3 moons appeared together in the consulate of J. Demizio and G. Fanio. A spark from a star grew bigger as it neared the earth, and after it reached the size of the moon, it shed a light like a cloudy day and went back into the sky like a torch. I suppose that was a weather balloon. Seneca, way back in here, way back. Seneca writing way back. Questionum Naturarum, questions of nature. Quote, those fires sometimes exceed the size of the sun, of which history often mentions, and that other light often confuses starlight so low and near the horizon as to make us think it could be mistaken for distant fire. Julian the Obsequious, 350 A.D. Quote, 3 moons were visible in 222 B.C. Also, Dionysio Cassiano said several stars glided across the sky at Lanavio, 175 B.C. In Gaul, they saw 3 suns and 3 moons at the same time in 122 B.C. Quote, near Spoleto, a ball of golden fire rolled on the ground, became bigger, and then moved across the ground toward the east. Tito Livio, 559 B.C. to 17 A.D., through the time of Christ. Quote, round shields spinning at great heights. The sky cracked like a great wound, a strong light shone across the opening. That's in the book of Prodigies. How do space scientists miss all this stuff? Why, the phenomenon has been observed centuries before their great-great-grandmothers were born, and they attributed it to stupidity and superstition. We're talking about eye observations spotting UFOs. Herodian the Syrian, 170. Quote, stars were seen in midair in broad daylight. That's in Book 1 in the History of the Empire after Marcus Aurelius. In Plutarch's Life of Caesar, quote, presence of such stars is always related to events considered supernatural. A comet showed 7 days. The Venerable Bede, English Historia Gentis Angloria, in the history of the English people, 672 to 735 A.D., says in chapter 4, quote, 4 appearances of flying objects. Huge light down from the sky covered the praying monks settling on the side of the abbey, finally disappeared in the depths of space as bright as the sun. St. Gregory of Tours, History of France, Historia Francorum. Quote, very bright spots flew over the French lands in 583. In the year 776, flying shields. That's a round, bright object, like a saucer. Flying shields appeared to guide the Saxons while they were sieging the horsemen of Charlemagne at Sigisburg. There were dazzling gleams of light like lamps, and red dragons were seen flying in the air. How about that? Plural. Dragons. Did you get that? Arthur Farstad said they were mythological and they were a joke. The head of the New King James Version Committee said they were jackals. Gregory of Tours says, red dragons. In the Historium of Florus, the History of Florence, by Benedict Roger of Wendover, quote, in 796, small globes were seen flying around the sun by people in various parts of England. Alcuin, in Vita Caroli, the Life of Charlemagne, 32 in the 32nd chapter, said, quote, in 810, we saw a large sphere descend like lightning from the sky. It traveled from east to west. So bright it made Carl's horse rear. He fell and was injured. Charlemagne later died of that fall. That's Carl the Great. Pippin, the son of Louis the Pious, mentions in his Ludovisi Vita, the life of Ludovisi the Seventh, verily this slaughter was preceded by terrible visions of things in the air. During the night they burnt like fires or shone like red blood. The abbot Mount Falcon, I don't know how you pronounce this, Montfaucon, de Villers of Villars, quote, the aerial beings from space were upset when landing with their huge vehicle. They took some men and women, chosen of the best ones. Oh, you better land on that one. When we run into the CIA and the CFR and Slick Willie and the NSA out in southwest United States. They took some men and women, chosen of the best ones, in order to teach them and dispel popular evil. But when these women returned to Earth, they were looked on as devils from space who had come to poison the crops. Now notice how much more accurate history is than CBS, NBC, CNN, or any state university in America. Benvenuto Cellini's biography, quote, O Almighty God, what marvelous thing do we behold above Florence, that's Italy. It was like a big beam of fire sparkling with a huge light. When was this? Bless my soul, it's the 20th of October, 1290, 200 years before Columbus discovered America. Quote, a silver object like a ring was seen slowly flying over Yorkshire. A fireball seemed to explode above Thuringia in 1548, dropping a substance like congealed blood. In 1557, Vienna was flown over by strange machines shedding light. Objects called 1, green suns, 2, burning discs, 3, red suns, and, quote, red dragons appeared in Poland and Nuremberg. There were round machines, flying discs, and rings of light over Austria, Switzerland, and Hamburg in 1547, 1558, 1566, and 1697. As much documentation UFOs at the time of Columbus and at the time of the 30 Years' War as there has been since 1970. There's nothing new about UFOs. But then as far as that goes, there's nothing new about aliens from outer space in flying boats and discs and globes. putting out fire and poison air. It's an old, old story. The first photograph of UFOs was taken August the 12th, 1883. It was a photograph of 150 cigar-shaped or spindle-shaped objects, solid, flying in formation. They were weather balloons, were they? I guess somebody mistook Venus for one of them. Don't you know, baby? Don't you know? I saw a disc up in the air, a flying saucer that wasn't there. It wasn't there again today. Oh, I wish it'd go away. Two more weren't there again today. Oh, I wish they'd go away. What are these things being reported? Well, according to NSA, the National Security Agency, the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, and the United States Air Force and Project Blue Book, they were seagulls flying around with flashlights in their mouths. Shakespeare, Henry IV, Part 3, Section 2, first paragraph. Edward, quote, "Dazzle mine eyes, or do I see 3 suns?" Richard, quote, "3 glorious suns, each a perfect sun. See, they join, embrace, and seem to kiss. Now they are one lamp and one sun. In this the heavens figure some event." Yeah, man, they sure do. Let's try Goethe. Goethe, the German poet and writer, 1768. In the 6th book of his autobiography, quote, "Innumerable little lights in step fashion, in a funnel shape, dazzled my eyes. They were so brilliant." 1768, before the American Revolution. Columbus Journal, October the 11th, 1492. At 10 p.m., Pedro Gutierrez spotted a light dancing up and down, appearing several times at night, and going by us in sudden and passing gleams. You know where Columbus is when they make that entry in the ship's log, October the 11th at 10 p.m.? I'll give you one guess. They are in the Bermuda Triangle. That's how they ran into San Salvador. Now, God knows, on a very brief analysis like we're making here, only running about 4 hours, we haven't got time to go into all the details of the Bermuda Triangle. But suffice it to say that in nearly every case we've been talking about, something is coming out of water and going back into water or going off into outer space. And whatever the thing is, it is able to enter water and leave water, whatever it is. Francisco Lopez de Gomara, 1553, said the United States was Atlantis. Paige Bryant, a seeress, that is a woman seer, under hypnosis psychometry, claimed after 2 trips into the triangle that she had contact with a gunner who disappeared December 5th, 1945, Robert Francis Gallivan, whom she heard screaming, "My God, tell me what happened." Atlantis was supposed to be in the Atlantic Ocean. It was called Lemuria in the Pacific, Lemuria, hence Lemurians. Lemurians were supposed to have had a third eye in the middle of their forehead. The all-seeing eye. That old page, or the old boy saw the Rosicrucian when he said he got down the heart of the earth. When he got down there, he saw an all-seeing eye plastered on the wall. That's that one-eye business. In Greek mythology, it's a cyclops. Among the lamas, Tibetan lamas, it's the third eye. It's a one-eyed giant. He doesn't have two eyes. See Zechariah for further details. The Antichrist has a darkened right eye. He's a southpaw. His right arm doesn't work. Now the 30th parallel goes through the middle of the Sargasso Sea. The 30th parallel, by the way, runs just south of Pensacola. And it runs through Alexandria, Egypt, Sodom and Gomorrah, Bosra, that's Kuwait, Cairo, and right by Mount Everest in Shanghai. Ivan de Sanderson says there are 12 gates to the underworld. And he said there's a hole straight through the Devil's Triangle that comes up in the Filipino Sea near Japan, near Iwo Jima. He says if Mount Everest were dumped in the Mariana Trench in the ocean, it'd be covered with 7,000 feet of water. 29 Empire State Buildings on top of each other would have to fill up the gap. He also claimed there's a deep hole at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. The Bermuda Triangle is actually a trapezium, and that is it's four-sided, with all four sides at different lengths. We just call it a triangle to scarp it down to a thing you can understand. The compass only points true north in the Bermuda Triangle and the Devil Sea. That's around Bermuda, Miami, East Puerto Rico. The deepest place out there is 36,198 feet. Then we have around Guam and northeast Luzon, 100 miles west of Iwo Jima, 27,500 feet. Do you know that eels migrate more than 2,000 miles to get to these triangles from rivers in Europe? Isn't that something? Segmented mollusks dredged from the depth of 11,000 feet in the Acapulco Trench off Central America were supposedly extinct 280 million years ago. You can still find them. The Sargasso Sea of weeds floating around floats over a 19,000-foot bottom, and Columbus thought land was near when he got in there, and that's when he saw his UFO. In 1956, Dr. Pete Colby of the Natural Museum of Stockholm, Sweden, said freshwater diatoms up from 12,000 feet near the Atlantic Ridge come from 110,000 years backward. Atlantic, by the way, was named after a giant. His name was Atlas. Plato speaks of this lost continent, Atlantis, and it was first mentioned by Solon, Solon, an Athenian statesman, who professed to have gotten it from the priests in Egypt. Remembering, of course, from our first tape, that the god Thoth said to Osiris that he was the god who went around in the flying boat.